Good evening. I'm Rebecca Hawthorne, President of the League of Women Voters of the Wayzata Plymouth area. I'd like to welcome our candidates, our audience, and our viewers on behalf of the League of Women Voters, Wayzata Plymouth area, and our co-host, the Minnetonka Eden Prairie Hopkins League. The League of Women Voters is a 104-year-old volunteer, nonpartisan organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. The views expressed in this forum tonight are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters. It is our purpose in sponsoring forums such as this to provide you with an opportunity to hear candidates discuss face-to-face the issues that are important to you. This is a nonpartisan forum. We ask that campaign buttons or campaign t-shirts not be worn, nor signs or literature distributed in this room. Please silence your electronic devices at this time. And now I'd like to introduce your moderator for this evening's forum, Deb Brinkman of St. Louis Park, and a League of Women Voter St. Louis Park member.
Good evening. Good evening. Tonight's forum is provided to give you the opportunity to learn about the candidates running for Senate District 45. Their background, motivations, and goals in relationship to the seat that they seek. Candidates will be answering questions submitted in advance or during the forum. These questions have been reviewed by an impartial committee familiar with the issue. It's our intention in good faith to select questions that represent the interests expressed by the voters, that are focused on the future and not based on hindsight, that are relevant to the office being sought, and are not personal in nature, hostile, embarrassing, or unclear. Questions will be addressed to all candidates and may be consolidated or edited. There's never enough time to cover all the issues in a setting such as this. If your questions were not addressed, feel free to contact the candidate directly. The rules for this evening's forum are as follows. Candidates will be allowed an opening statement with a maximum of 2 minutes. During the question and answer period, answers will be limited to 1 minute unless designated by me as the moderator. We do have one question that will be a little bit longer. Opening statements will be given in alphabetical order, and questions will be answered in a rotating order. A 15-second warning will be given to the candidates. The candidates will also be given an opportunity for a 1-minute closing statement. Candidates, please finish your sentence quickly when you see the stop sign, or you will be interrupted. We ask that there be no demonstrations in support or in opposition to the candidates or their positions, and that candidates be allowed their full time to get their points across. Recordings of this event, whether in person or by computer, may not be used without the express written approval of the League of Women Voters. The League will only allow audio-video of this event to be broadcast in its entirety, except by the media reporting on the event. If you have a question, please write it on a 3x5 card that's available. You should have gotten one when you walked in, and they'll just hand it up. And one of our volunteers will come and get it and pick it up, and that will go back for review at our question table. The candidates running for Senate District 45 are Kathleen Fowke and Johnson Stewart. So we'll begin with the 2-minute opening remarks. First, we'll start with Kathleen Fowke.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. And I also want to congratulate my opponent on her win in the primary. I am a proud mother, grandmother, and business owner. I decided to run for the state senate because I love this state, and I believe you fight for what you love. Our state has been knocked out of balance by the lack of listening, the lack of openness, and by the lack of compromise. I believe we can do better. We must do better. When I'm out listening to the voters at the doors, parades, and many of my community events that I've attended, I hear one message loud and clear. They are tired of the chaos and the constant divisiveness. If elected to the state senate, I pledge to listen, gather the best ideas, and then implement them. I am here tonight because I want you to know I support business, both large and small. They employ our neighbors and our friends, and we need to ensure that Minnesota is a great place to do business. I'm here tonight to once again state I will not vote to ban abortion or place heavy-handed restrictions on women. I look forward to implementing solutions that support women and young families. I'm here tonight to let you know I will be an advocate for our schools, teachers, and children. Our kids deserve the best education, and with flexible funding, we can accomplish just that. I'm excited to be here and share with everyone my vision for a better Minnesota, for a balanced Minnesota. Single-party control showed us dangers of one-sided government. I look forward to heartfelt discussions so we can implement real solutions. I promise to be a voice for common sense, and I look forward to sharing that vision with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Johnson Stewart.
Well, hello, everyone. It's good to see a full room. I'm Ann Johnson Stewart. I'm a civil engineer. I'm a former state senator, a former business owner, and I teach at the University of Minnesota. I ran so that we could build thriving communities where all of us, regardless of who we are or where we live, who we vote for or who we love, can thrive. I live in Minnetonka with my husband and my family and our 2 dogs. We're both very active in volunteer work, especially at the university. My parents were both public school teachers, so I learned early the value of hard work, but also the value of public education and what a difference world-class teaching can do in our lives. I first ran for Senate to address the need for common sense gun reform, and I was also concerned about our lack of maintaining our infrastructure. I felt very strongly that we needed a civil engineer in the Senate. Those issues still motivate me a lot, but I also know that right now we must maintain the responsive and compassionate leadership that voters deserve. We desperately need legislators that trust women to make their own health care decisions. As a civil engineer, I know how infrastructure works, and what I love about it is it doesn't have a party. We all depend on it, we take it for granted, and we expect it to work. And we need it to power a thriving economy. In 1995, I started a small business. I grew it from 1, I suppose you'd say, to 35 like-minded professionals who value data-driven problem solving and who love building those things we depend on. I sold that business in 2022 and to focus on teaching and volunteer work and public service. I hold those values very high and think it's a noble cause to continue to teach and to run for Senate. Oh, sorry about that. I was looking back there, sorry.
Very good. Thank you, Ann. Now we'll start with the questions. Again, we'll go in rotating order, and you'll have 1 minute to answer these first few questions. So we'll first start with Ann. What is your top legislative priority for District 45 and why?
Well, that's an easy one for me. My top legislative priority is infrastructure and securing bonding money and other public funding for our drinking water systems. In SD 45, we have significant challenges in that our communities were built very sporadically. Many of them were built for homes that are much smaller than what sits on the shores of Lake Minnetonka now. And we have several communities that have drinking water issues that are severe. Mound, for example, people who live in Mound cannot drink the water coming out of their kitchen sink. I think that's abhorrent, and we should be not standing for that. We also have several communities that need significant increases in funding for public works and drinking water treatment and distribution. As their senator, that's going to be my priority, to make sure that we have everybody with up-to-date drinking water, not just, frankly, in SD 45, but in the whole state.
Thank you, Anne. Kathleen.
Over the past 2 years, we have seen a state spending $18 billion in surplus. I am running because I think this is wrong. With that $18 billion surplus spent and zero ground common sense achieved, that one-sided government forgot about the seniors, the mental health facilities, the hospitals, the schools, and additionally, the oversight that was needed never came when the $1 billion was spent in fraud. We can and must do better. With inflation being high and everything costing more, I am running because I believe we need to lower our taxes, not raise our taxes. If elected, I will ensure that we have transparent and accountable state government. I will be sure that we fund education, hospitals, and our senior facilities, and every decision I make will be driven by what is best for the people in this district and across this great state.
Thank you, Kathleen. Kathleen, we'll start with you for this next question. How would you work for bipartisan support on issues that divide your district? Please give an example.
Well, there's many examples that we could talk about. One example Anne brought up already, and Mound needs clean drinking water. I think this should be a bipartisan, forward-thinking matter. There's no reason that any city in the state of Minnesota shouldn't have clean drinking water. I understand that Representative Andrew Myers did get them $10.3 million. As I talked to the Mayor Jason Holt just a couple months ago, I understand that they need another $20 million to get that done. I look forward to working across the aisle to make sure that Mound has clean drinking water.
Thank you, Kathleen. Anne.
Well, I think Minnesotans share a lot of values, not only around infrastructure, but about public education and public safety. And for any of these things to be well-resourced, we have to have bipartisan work. When I was in the Senate, one area that I worked constantly as a bipartisan member of the Senate on was the bonding committee. So while we have excellent infrastructure in the metro area, with the exception of a few places where we really need some drinking water repair, it's mostly the rural communities that are represented by Republican legislators that I worked with to try to pass bonding bills. And bonding trickles down to all these other programs. So education is often funded through bonding money, whether it's for facilities or for buses or whatever. And also, public safety is often funded through bonding. We see a lot of outstate fire departments that severely need those facilities. So that's an easy one.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, the next question, Anne, we'll start with you. It's on education. Few Minnesota schools have gone unscathed from the effects of inflation. Higher than usual salary increases and lagging state aid. If elected, what would be your view of state education funding and whether to reduce, maintain, or increase the funding?
Well, part of the challenge with public schools is we've been severely underfunding it for years. I remember when I was in the Senate, the Republicans in control proposed almost nothing for public schools. So last year, when we did fund $2.5 billion to public schools, that was just a start to get us caught up and address the issue of severe underfunding that we've seen for years. I would continue on that catching up and continue to fund public schools. I think that that's a value that we can agree on, whether you're Republican or Democrat. And we know what teachers need. We know that we also need to train more teachers. So there's a lot we can do as a state, and I think that both our Senate Finance and our Senate Policy Committees have done a great job in the last 2 years. We just need to continue with that work.
Thank you, Anne. Kathleen.
So education is so important. Yes, we did fully fund education this year, but education did not get the dollars that they really needed. I have met with the superintendents across the district, and they were all very grateful for the funds. But the mandates that they put on the school districts, well, it had left them scrambling. While some of these mandates accomplished worthy goals, we should provide our schools with funding, then let them decide how best to spend the money. As I've talked about with the neighbors, they're concerned about our large classroom sizes. My granddaughter, being 11 years old, lives in the district. She had 32 kids in her class last year. That's too many kids. She had a great teacher, but that's still too many kids. If elected, I will prioritize 3 things in education: provide flexible funding, ensure parent involvement, and review mandates and ensure benefits outweigh the costs. We need teachers working with parents, and we need parents supporting our teachers.
Thank you, Kathleen. And we'll start with you for this next question. The topic will be on safety. Many are concerned with crime in our communities. What legislation, if any, would you support regarding public safety?
Yeah, well, that's an important one. I just met with the Sheriff Shane yesterday as we sat and had coffee and chatted for about an hour and a half. Our police departments are not funded. We have so many issues regarding public safety. I don't even know where to start. If we look at 2020 and what has gone on with the riots and the protests and the burning of our city, it's very clear to me what we need to do to help our cities. We need to make sure the cops know that we have their backs. Right now, police officers don't want to go into policing the kids. So the cops where they're at right now, 80% of them were asked, would they recommend their children becoming a cop? And 80% of them said no. What does that mean?
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
Thank you. Well, I'm committed to protecting our communities and making them safer, for sure. I originally ran to lower gun violence, and we really cannot address the issue of reducing violence in our communities without addressing gun violence. We also need to make sure that our police and our firefighters and our first responders are well funded and have the resources to do their jobs. In Minnetonka, we have world-class firefighting equipment and clothing and facilities. That is not the case in rural Minnesota. As I said in my last answer, making sure that we fully fund public safety is more than just talking about it. It's actually making sure that rural communities have adequate fire equipment and fire halls, and they're keeping their own selves safe and not bringing home chemicals and fire retardants to their children. So every Minnesotan should have access to the same public safety equipment.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, the next question is going to be on the ERA, and this is the question that will allow a little bit longer, so we're going to allow 2 minutes to answer this question. You don't need to use all 2 minutes, but we'll give you 2 minutes, and I'll just double check with our timekeeper, make sure she's good. All right, and Anne, we'll start with you. Do you support the adoption of a ballot issue to add the ERA to the Minnesota State Constitution? Why or why not? And what language should or should not be included?
Well, yes, I do support the adoption of the ERA and an amendment to put it out to all voters. I'm 60 years old, and I remember graduating from college in the 80s thinking women have obtained equality. Things are going to be great when I'm an engineer on construction sites. And now here we are 40 years later, and things have not changed that much, although they really haven't changed. I think we need the ERA to protect us in all areas of our lives. And so while I don't have the actual language in front of me, I do support the efforts to include reproductive freedom and choices on that, because I don't trust that Minnesota will always have the governmental or the legislative environment where we can take abortion care and birth control for granted. So yes, I do support it. I think it's high time we passed it. I think it is an important thing not just to women, but also to men. And in 2024, 2025, this is something that I think we can all get behind. So with a constitutional amendment going out to everyone, I think it offers a good opportunity for everybody to have input, and yes, I support that.
Thank you, Anne. And Kathleen.
Well, as you know, I was not in office when this bill came before the legislation. We need to make sure that we are, as a woman, doing everything we can to support women. We need to make sure that we do not discriminate against our neighbors. We also need to ensure that we have our First Amendment priority protected, the right to free speech and the right to practice your religion. My concern with this bill is, once again, I haven't seen it, but I want to make sure our religious freedoms are protected. And until I see the bill in front of me, I cannot honestly make a statement regarding that. It's when we need to sit down with our colleagues, find common ground, make sure that everything makes sense in that bill, and absolutely, the Equal Rights Amendment should be constitutional. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And so the next topic that we have is on the bonding bill. And Kathleen, we'll start with you. The 2024 Minnesota legislature was unable to find bipartisan support for an infrastructure bill to fund water treatment plants, roads, bridges, university buildings, and other public work projects. What is your position on funding infrastructure, and how would you work across the aisle to enact such legislation?
Excuse me. We definitely need to pass a bonding bill. We definitely need to take care of our roads and our bridges. And look what happened to our dams when we received all that rain. We need to sit down and find common ground solutions for these issues that come up. We need to ensure that our roads are taken care of. I know in St. Bonifacius they need help. I understand that in Long Lake they need help with their roads. We can work together because these are topics that we can work together very easily on. These are important things that we can focus on and find common ground.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
Well, working on the bonding bill requires bipartisan support because any public bonding must be approved by a supermajority. That's one of the reasons that we didn't get a bonding bill last year. Democrats can't pass a bonding bill on their own, and Republicans can't pass a bonding bill on their own. And so it becomes a very political hot potato at the end of the session as different parties try to bargain for what they want. I was very angry that the bonding bill was not passed last year. There are some communities that are in desperate need of improvements to their infrastructure. There are communities in Minnesota like Mount, who can't drink the water from their kitchen sink. There are communities with raw sewage in their backyard. I've seen it. And so for us to not pass a bonding bill is inexcusable. I will do all that I can, just as I did as a volunteer for the last 2 years, to work across all party lines to get a bonding bill passed because it's critical.
Thank you, Anne. And we'll start with you for this next question. The topic is going to be on the budget surplus. If elected, what would your priorities be for using a state budget surplus?
Well, my priorities are pretty simple: infrastructure, public education, and public safety. All of these are shared values, I bet, to every person in this room. We all rely on infrastructure. We all know what it's like if you turn on the sink and nothing comes out. That's pretty irritating. We all know what it's like, well, some of us know, what it's like to have a flooded basement because your sewer pipe broke, as ours did a couple years ago. So infrastructure is something that has no party, and I feel strongly that if we had a budget surplus, this is exactly where we should be spending money. I mentioned it earlier. It's what we did, or what the legislature did in the last biennium. They spent an additional $3 billion in both cash and bonding just to catch up. But I think the same holds true for fully supporting public education. Again, it ties directly to bonding money and making sure that all of our police and firefighters are fully funded and have the resources they need.
Thank you, Anne. Kathleen.
So when you have a bonding surplus or budget surplus, you want to make sure that you follow through with the promises that you made. Last go around, that budget surplus was supposed to go to the seniors to help them reduce their Social Security tax. If you say something, then you must follow through and do it. I would like to see the surplus used for mental health facilities, our senior facilities, and our hospitals. As you know, or may have heard, North Memorial had to close 8 of their beds that gave people no place to go when they were suffering. 8 beds were shorted. Can you imagine showing up to the hospital when you really needed a mental health service and you needed to either leave or go down to HCMC? We can do better.
Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, this next topic is on healthcare disparities. And Kathleen, we'll start with you. Reproductive rights remain a hot topic at both the national and state level. What are your views on Minnesota's passage of the legislation protecting reproductive health care decisions and access to care, as well as protecting parents' medical records from prosecution by other states?
As I mentioned in my opening statement, since announcing my candidacy for office, I have been clear about one thing. I don't like extremes. That means no matter what anyone says, I will not vote to ban abortion. That is extreme and that will hurt women. Further, I will not support efforts that put unreasonable restrictions on women. As I talked with voters, what I have heard is they want women to have options, and I couldn't agree more. As you know, they passed the PRO Act, as you mentioned, and in our state constitution, it is protected. Now, Minnesota, let's ensure that women know that we have their backs. Let's make sure that they know they can go to a facility and receive birth control, education, and make sure that they can receive counseling if needed. You know what, when she puts up that timer, it really does kind of get you, and she's over there. Let's use our hearts and our minds on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
Well, reproductive freedom is a core value for me. I've been working on this issue for decades. I trust women to know what's best and to control their own bodies and their own futures. In the 80s, I trained as a clinic escort, and I know from that experience that there are as many reasons for women going to an abortion clinic as there are the women themselves. I also served on the NARAL Pro-Choice Minnesota Board and was awarded their Legislator of the Year Award in 2021, probably because I was one of the original authors of the PRO Act. I firmly believe that we must control, or we must protect, the full spectrum of reproductive care. That includes family, birth control and fertility treatments, abortion, and health care. Last year, there were 6 attempts by the Republicans in the Senate to put restrictions on abortion. Any restriction is something I'm very much against. I am a vote that women can count on based on my decades of experience in fighting this fight.
Thank you, Anne. Kathleen.
I think I already
She
answered
already
that
did.
question.
No.
That's okay.
Thank you. All right, the next question is on housing. What legislative measures, if any, would you support regarding housing, ownership, and rental?
Well, as a real estate agent, you know that the housing prices today are unaffordable. We need to make sure we do have affordable housing. As you look around the state, there's pockets, but just very few pockets where someone can actually buy a house that's nearly $350,000. Not in Senate District 45. The homes are way, way more expensive. We need to ensure that our building costs come down, and that is due to inflation. We need to make sure that we work with our neighbors and our cities work with our state and help them find better ways to provide affordable housing. But it should stay at the city level. I just ask that the state work with the city to provide some there she goes, devise some forthright and thinking moving forward. We can work together on this, and as a realtor, I can appreciate this, no doubt.
Thank you, Kathleen. Anne.
Well, affordable housing is something that I think affects all of us because we all have children who are not all, but some of us have children who are trying to get established in their first or second home. In Minnetonka, we have affordable housing that costs $1,200 a month to rent. To me, that's more than our house payment ever was, and I don't think that's affordable. So I think when we talk about affordable housing, we need to talk about by whose measure. This is certainly not just a case in the metro area. We have significant housing needs in rural Minnesota, so much so that employers don't have enough housing for their staffs. I think there are some things that the state can do. We can implement housing projects through bonding money. We can fund low-income loans or loans that are forgivable to spur economic development in certain areas. And we can work with nonprofits who have a handle on multifamily housing and low-income housing, and I'm all for it.
Thank you. The next question is on social and racial justice. And Anne, we'll start with you. What legislative policies, if any, would you pursue to address economic disparities in labor force participation, unemployment, and income and poverty levels between Minnesota's white residents and residents of color?
Well, the state has put forth some money towards workforce training in an attempt to eliminate some of the racial disparities. I know firsthand because I've been doing this for the last 20 years. So as an example, I worked to train people of color and women getting into the construction trades. I've taught hundreds of people who are looking for a new start in life or new ways to work. And it's a very good way to put people on the path towards economic stability and towards union jobs where they can afford to raise a family and buy a home. I have seen firsthand just the transformative change that this kind of funding and program makes in everyday work, and that's just one example of what we can do. We also need to be looking at our housing disparities and education, but I think we already have several great examples of education and workforce training that does an excellent job.
Thank you. Kathleen.
So the social disparities are still real in this state. I believe what we need to do is we need to look at our schools, our high schools, and bring back the trades. Let's make sure our kids know that there's something else that they can do other than just going to college. We need trades. We need labor. We have a shortage of labor right now. Whether it's blue-collar labor or whether it's, if you're going in to be a cosmetologist, I need to get my hair cut. I don't know about you. So we need to focus on our kids and make sure that we are spurring them up and moving them forward. I also was a part of a program. It was called Perspectives, and it was a community that was in St. Louis Park. And in St. Louis Park, they had women there that were incarcerated, and this program helped them reach their limit and help them get out of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And we'll start with you for this next question, and it is on childcare. Childcare is critical to our labor market. What, if anything, should the legislature do regarding access and availability to quality and affordable childcare for working families throughout Minnesota?
I appreciate this question. I would love to do all that I can to help lower the cost of childcare. I think if we all sit down and have a group discussion and figure out together what can we do to help lower the cost of childcare. People today, young families, are considering not having children because they can't afford childcare. But if we bring the constituents in a room and we sit down, once again, we can find common ground solutions. I believe it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
Well, there's a lot that's been done, but a lot that needs to be done around affordable childcare. It is true that many young families or young couples are deciding not to have children or postponing it because childcare is just outrageous. There's several things that we can do. We can continue to fund the construction of childcare centers in rural communities and in the metro area. We can work to increase mandatory minimums for pay for childcare workers. That's a big problem, is not only we don't have the facilities, but we don't have the staff. We can continue to fund child tax credits for families. Those were really effective in the last 4 years, and I'd like to see those continued. We can also work with private businesses like they've done in the rural Minnesota with companies like Polaris or Marvin Windows, where they fund the child care centers themselves, and we can give them tax credits for doing that.
Thank you, Anne. Then next question, again, we'll start with you. It's on the environment is our topic. On the November ballot, Minnesotans will be asked to reauthorize or end a constitutional amendment allocating 40% of state lottery proceeds to the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. If you support reauthorization, what environmental issues in District 45 need to be addressed? If you do not support reauthorization, how would you allocate the lottery proceeds?
Well, I support it to be continued. We have an expert not only in the district but in the room here with Representative Acom, who does a great job on environmental issues, and I'll look forward to partnering with her as I did when I was in the Senate before. I think it's really important that we continue to fund these types of special projects. It is funded with very strict oversight from representatives of both the House and the Senate, and we hold dear so much that this program is allowed or allows us to fund things like parks and natural areas. I think this is a very excellent idea, and for sure I will vote to support it and to continue it.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Would you repeat the question,
repeat it?
please?
For
Yeah,
sure.
Thank you.
A bill, this is on the on the environment. On the November ballot, Minnesotans will be asked to reauthorize or end a constitutional amendment allocating 40% of the state lottery proceeds to the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. If you support reauthorization, what environmental issues in District 45 need to be addressed? If you do not support reauthorization, how would you allocate the lottery proceeds?
I would support the reauthorization, absolutely. We live in a land of 10,000 lakes, and we have a beautiful boundary waters, and we definitely need to ensure that our lakes and our streams and our boundary waters are protected. We are right here, we're right in the heart of Lake Minnetonka, so we understand the benefit that that lake gives us. I would also like to ensure that those that use the lake and rivers, that they use it respectively. Make sure that they are cleaning off their boats when they leave the lakes and before they enter. There's so many things that we can do, and I believe if we work together, we can get them done.
Thank you, Kathleen. The next question will be on the local zoning authority. A bill that would end single-family zoning in Minnesota and bar municipalities from using restrictive zoning to block housing developments has stalled in both the legislative chambers. In what circumstances, if any, do you think the legislature should override local decisions, particularly in regards to planning and zoning authority?
Is that my question first?
Kathleen,
Thank
we'll
you.
start with
Well,
you.
once again, as a realtor, this hits home with me. I don't think the legislature should be involved in this discussion. I think it needs to remain with the cities. The cities know best how to run their cities and their neighborhoods. And when a city gets overpopulated, it's not good for anyone. The schools get overcrowded and the teachers get stressed, and it's just not a good idea. Let's keep it local and keep it out of the state's hands.
Thank you, Kathleen. Anne?
Well, I somewhat agree. I think local communities know best what type of infrastructure and community they want to have and one that they are interested in developing. I think the challenge...
There we go.
All right. Okay, I'm going to start over. So I agree.
Yeah.
I think.
Hold on, let's just get the timekeeper. We'll just wait for a thumbs up. Okay, we're good.
Okay, I would tend to agree. I think local communities know best what's right for their own communities, and I think building housing, according to what this law or this bill proposed, is somewhat, it's too general. So, for example, there's many communities around Lake Minnetonka that all of the residents, half of the residents are on septic tanks or on private wells. To require that a community with just, a variety of types of services install or zone for multifamily housing might just be not a good fit. It might not work in that community. So for the state to mandate that is, I think, a bit too broad. I do support the state mandating some things around development, but in this one area, I think it's too broad based on the fact that we have so much diversity in our individual communities.
Okay, thank you. And so the next question is on inflation. Anne, we'll start with you. What measures would you support to address the rising living costs experienced by Minnesota residents?
Well, prices are crazy. I mean, last night I was at Quick Trip and eggs are still $4 a dozen. Who else remembers when they used to be 99 cents? Like, what is happening? So if eggs and milk and dairy and eggs and milk and butter are expensive, that's a really big problem for every family because those are the staples we rely on. So there are a few things that we can do as a state to address inflation. We can hold corporations accountable for price gouging or for record profits, but we can also help families by lowering costs on things like prescription drugs, on insurance, on health care, on daycare, as we just mentioned before, and on college. So there's a lot of ways that the state can work to make things more affordable, but we need to be innovative and we need to be thoughtful and work with the entire members in order to find those solutions.
Thank you, Anne. Kathleen.
Yes, well, really inflation has more to do with the federal level rather than the state level. The federal issue is we need to make sure and ensure our energy is flowing, and right now it is not. As a state, we need to make sure that being that inflation is high, that we do not raise taxes on our neighbors, that we need to lower the cost of energy, we need to lower the cost of our gas and not put taxes on our gas. We can do so much better if we think about not just putting out an answer, but actually finding a solution. And I look towards the state to make sure that we lower the taxes for all the hardworking Minnesotans.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, the next question is on the sports gambling bill. Kathleen, we'll start with you. Do you support or oppose legislation of mobile sports betting in Minnesota, and why?
I do. I think less government is best. So if somebody wants to bet on sports, they should be able to.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
Well, I was in the legislature when we were debating sports betting. It never came before a vote, so I didn't have to make a commitment, and I'm not sure I could make a commitment right now. I have been following this issue in preparation of possibly returning to the Senate, and what I have been noticing is senators who I align with in my values very closely both support and oppose sports betting. So I have to be honest, I'm not avoiding the issue. I think there's concerns about high school level sports betting. There's issues about allowing betting during games. I think there's all kinds of concerns around sports betting, and I'm frankly not convinced that the legislature has ironed that out. And I guess if it comes before us, I'll have to make a decision then.
Thank you, Anne. And we'll start with you for this next question. The topic is end-of-life bill. End-of-life Option Act was proposed in 2024 legislation that would allow an individual to request medical aid in dying provided certain requirements are met. Do you support or oppose this legislation? Please explain your position.
I do support the end-of-life bill. I'm very transparent about that. I have read a lot about it. Again, in the last 2 years, I've continued to follow what the legislature is doing, and I feel very confident that the guardrails I have been put into the bill that would protect those people who are vulnerable and those people like members of my own family who don't have a terminal illness and who are not of the do not have the wherewithal to know that that's a reasonable option for them. I cared for both my parents as they died from very painful cancer, both of them in their homes. It was gut-wrenching to watch, and I'm sure many of us had the same experience. For me to be able to take out some of the pain that both my parents experienced during their cancer journey is something that I would have liked to have had available to at least consider.
Thank you, Anne. Kathleen.
I would firmly say no. I do not support the end-of-life bill. I believe that this will do more harm to families than we know. Can you imagine a family that has a mother and a father that one of them has a terminal illness, they don't have money, and the kids don't have money, and so the mother or the father is going to feel as though they need to end their life because they don't want their kids to suffer. And I would not support this bill, period.
Thank you, Kathleen. Kathleen, we'll start with you with this next question, and it is on mental health. Our youth are experiencing high rates of mental health issues. What legislative action, if any, do you support to address this?
Yes. Mental health is a huge issue, and as you know, it's one of my priorities on my platform. In meeting with the superintendents around the district, I have realized that even in the schools today, they have one counselor, but there's a waiting list to see that counselor. We have issues here, not just in this state, but across our country. We need to support those that have the silent voices. I lost somebody several years ago from mental health, and I promised her mother that once elected, I will do everything in my power to make sure somebody that needs mental health help has it. Like I mentioned earlier, North Memorial closed 8 of their beds. I'm thankful that Allina Health has helped and supported some of these mental health facilities, the one that's located in Fridley by chance. Allina Health is doing good work, and I hope to use them as a focus on how we can do things better in the future.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
I agree that there's much more we could do around providing more resources to both teachers and counselors in our public schools, and I very much would support that. There was just an article in the Star Tribune last weekend about reimbursement for mental health services, and it occurred to me that we're not doing things right if we specify how much therapists can get reimbursed for counseling sessions and how many counseling sessions a patient is entitled to. I've seen this firsthand in my own family. So the cost of therapy is not reimbursed fully by insurance, at least in Minnesota, and the number of visits that are allowed by private insurance is mandated. I think that as a legislature, we could look into that and we could allow therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists be in charge of their own treatment, and I think that would make a big difference.
Thank you, Anne. And Anne, we'll start with you with this next question. The topic is climate change. What legislation would you support to address climate change and its effect in Minnesota? And what is your view on nuclear energy?
Well, I wrote my first paper on nuclear energy in 8th grade, and I've been studying it ever since. I have to tell you, I frankly am not a big proponent of nuclear energy, just simply because for us to meet our carbon-free goals by 2040, which is just 15 years from now, there's no way we could even build a nuclear plant in that time. Even the smaller ones that you're reading about in trade journals. So I think looking to nuclear as a way to solve our energy crisis is somewhat impractical. The last nuclear plant that was built in the U.S. Was built in Georgia, and it was billions of dollars over budget, and still is not up and running. I do support increased solar. I think we could be doing much more with solar energy, not just on farmland or on ground, but on all of our buildings, on our schools, on our parking lots, and so I would look more towards solar than nuclear energy.
Thank you, Anne. And Kathleen.
Yes. Well, this topic I can talk to you about all day. So you picked a great subject for me. We need to ensure that we have clean, reliable, and affordable energy. Here in Minnesota, we do have an abundance of renewable energy, which is great. But the fact is, we are all still connected to that big grid. We cannot just run on renewables and batteries alone. We need carbon-free nuclear energy and natural gas if we want our grid to stay reliable. Further, I don't support mandates that are not based on science. Energy is essential in our lives. We want our homes to be cool in the summer and comfortable in the winter. As senator, I would advance clean energy initiatives at the speed of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right, this next question, and this is the last question that I have that's been submitted. It has to do with migration of Minnesota residents. And again, we'll start with Kathleen. What would you do to stem out migration of Minnesota residents? Working age people are leaving the state, and it's weighing on the economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have to address why they're leaving. That's the first thing. Our taxes are high, our property taxes are high, our estate taxes are high. What tax in Minnesota isn't high? You can't die here, or you're going to pay a lot of tax. It's sad. We want to make sure our mothers and fathers stay here, and they're around for our grandchildren. It's an important topic. I hope that if I'm so honored to be elected, can get into office and make sure we reduce taxes to make sure people are not leaving our state.
Thank you, Kathleen. And Anne.
Well, as far as migration of new graduates goes, I think that is an issue, and as somebody who teaches at the University of Minnesota in the engineering school, I see this firsthand. I think there is a lot that we can do as a state to address migration. As Kathleen said, we need to look at why new grads are leaving and what we can do to keep them here. The Federal CHIPS Act, for example, offers states a huge opportunity for creating new technology and new facilities that not only keep engineering grads and other young people in the state, but also attract them here. And I know that our state is doing a lot of work to secure those grants and to make Minnesota a great place to live. I have to say it's a myth that Minnesotans are leaving. A recent study in the Star Tribune showed that that's actually not happening across the state, and we all know why. It's a great place to live.
Thank you, Anne. All right, we'll now move to our closing statements. Again, you'll get 1 minute for your closing statement because Kathleen started with opening statements, and we'll start with you with our closing statements, and we can go ahead and begin.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Deb, and all the league members. Thank you, Kathleen. It's a pleasure. We know that there's a lot at stake in this election. We both have very different visions, which have been evident tonight. But we all know that reproductive freedom is under attack by Republican legislatures around the U.S. As a mom and a grandma, I'm very worried that my girls and my granddaughter will lose control over their bodies and their futures if I don't win this Senate race. Remember, I served in the Minnesota Senate when the Republicans were in the majority. I remember countless attempts to restrict or outlaw abortion. I remember zero money for public schools and no concern for our changing climate or energy needs. This election is about Minnesota moving forward and continuing the progress we've seen in the last 2 years, and I ask for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann and Kathleen.
Yes. Thank you again for holding this discussion tonight. I'm running for the state senate to bring balance back to Minnesota. The one-sided government gave money to our schools, and then they restricted how it was spent. The one-sided government spent your $18 billion surplus, and then they raised your taxes. The one-sided government seemed to have forgotten our seniors as they failed to eliminate or reduce the tax on Social Security. If elected, I want to ensure that our communities are safe, our businesses can prosper, and we can live in a Minnesota that works for us all. I vow to support women and families and find solutions to help reduce childcare costs. I vow to protect your religious freedoms, and I vow to be your voice in the Senate. I look forward to a brighter and balanced tomorrow. My name is Kathleen Fowke, and I would be honored to receive your vote.
Thank you, Kathleen. This concludes the Senate District 45 candidate forum. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I thank the candidates for being part of the democratic process by running for office and for being willing to serve our community. Audience, please join me in thanking the candidates with your applause. A little bit more, hold on. Thank you also to the League of Women Voter volunteers, our audience here, and those viewing this event virtually for your participation in this candidate forum. Thank you to the Minnetonka City staff for supporting this event and for Comcast for broadcasting live streaming, and recording tonight's forum. On-demand viewing can be accessed at lwvwpa.org. For additional election information, we encourage you to visit vote411.org, the League of Women Voters award-winning one-stop shop where voters can register to vote, find their polling place, and learn how candidates stand on issues. Please remember to vote in the November 5th election by absentee ballot or in person. Early voting begins on September 20th. Your vote is your voice. The League of Women Voters welcomes new members, both men and women, at lwvwpa.org. This concludes the candidate forum. Thank you, everyone, and good night.